Hello and welcome to the Phoenix Cinema Podcast. I am Chris Austin.
And I'm Ian Hawks.
And this is a podcast where we discuss what's showing at the historic Phoenix Cinema. And this week, we're going to be discussing the movie The Zone of Interest. Whew.
Do you want to start?
Heavy. Sure, yeah. Oh my God. Well, I mean, I guess first of all, I'll ask you. Are you okay? Since watching this movie?
Yeah, I mean, it's deeply affecting. I think I'm going to think about this movie for a long time, and I hope that I go back and rewatch it. You know, it feels like the type of film that I hope gets the recognition that it deserves, and that I hope is seen as something that can be shown educationally, and that can be just watched and rewatched as a reminder of things. Like the feelings that I'm feeling are very heavy and hard feelings to process, but I recognize the importance of them, if that makes sense.
Extremely, yeah. Yeah, I absolutely agree. This was a hard watch. This was dark and disturbing and powerful. And it's a horror movie. It's a horror movie in so many ways. Yeah. And yeah, it really I mean, to paraphrase or to quote, shall I say, the title of this director's former movie, this just completely gets under your skin in a way that you just can't, you find it so hard to shake. Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest with you, dude. I don't even know where to start. I guess I will just start with the sound design, first and foremost, is just impeccable. And that's, you know, it's so interesting to watch a movie where it's like you don't really hone in on one particular technical element, like, oh, go and watch this movie because the sound design is amazing. But it's all about the sound design. And it is, I mean, it's just, it's haunting. It really is haunting.
Yeah, no, in every single scene, and it's, you know, I had heard a lot about the film, and so I anticipated when people said, "Oh, there's this incredible multi-layered sound design." I anticipated that maybe you would be kind of like following things going on in the background, or there would be specific moments that would stick out to you. And the thing that makes the sound design so effective and so haunting is that it's completely ever present at all times. Like every single scene, you just want it to stop. You want there to be a moment of silence, but there's not a moment of silence because there are thousands and millions of people dying and suffering half a mile, I mean, sometimes 15 feet away from them. And it is ceaseless. I mean, like there's that horrific scene where they're talking about the blueprints for an incineration chamber.
Oh, Jesus. So casually.
And they talk about how it will be constant, that it will never have to stop. And it's like, and the film does, I think, such a good job, especially for a film that's only an hour and 45 minutes long. I mean, it's not actually like a long film, but it feels so long because when you're watching it, every scene, you just are like, please make it stop. Like, please make the suffering stop. And you just hear it all the time in every single scene. And it could have been so easy, I think, to overdo. It could have been so easy to have more kind of specific, you know, individuals suffering. And there are a couple scenes where they do that to great and very sobering effect. But for the most part, it's just the grind and like the trains and the shouting and the cries and the dogs barking. And it's just this like ceaseless kind of like tremble that's going through the whole film. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And it's it does something to you, you know, maybe even on a subconscious level. But I mean, you leave the cinema. I mean, it's traumatic. But you know, I watched it with I watched it with my partner, and we left, and it was a beautiful day. The sun was out, you know, birds were, you know, singing, and we went to like this coffee shop, and I heard a child crying in the distance, and I immediately just thought, oh my God, you know, it's
Yeah.
it's coming from Auschwitz, you know.
Yeah, no,
Or
I
it's
know.
like,
Yes.
did you hear that? You know, did you hear that car the car backfire that sounded like a distant gunshot?
Yeah.
It just gets into your head, man.
Well, my kids were sleeping in the next room, and there would be moments where I would hear a child crying, and I would be like, "Oh, did one of my kids wake up?" And then you realize, like, no, that's not my kid. It's terrible. It's truly terrible. No, this. I mean, it's such a smart decision. I mean, there's so many smart decisions made in this film, and I admire it so much for that. And one of the things, you know, when I first heard the pitch for this film like a year ago or so before it came out, I was very excited about it. I knew Jonathan Glazer, I think, was the person to do it and do it well. And so excited's maybe the wrong word, but I understood that this would be a good piece of art. And the thing I didn't expect, I think there was this part of me, and this probably shows my privilege and my distance from these events. I think there was this part of me that thought, oh, it's going to be this family right next door to this suffering. And so we're going to see them somehow grappling with this dissonance, somehow grappling with this guilt, right? And the reality is they don't at all, really. And that is so much more terrible. And also the other thing that I think is so smart about this, I think other films that I've seen about the Holocaust, I think have very accurately and soberly portrayed, you know, the type of what's happening obviously to the victims and the ways that that's affecting them, and specifically the oppressors, you know, in the moments when they are, you know, being oppressed and captured and killed. But I think a lot of times it's easy to think, oh, they're doing that because they hate them. And I think, and they must just like hate them so much, and that must be the only reason that they're doing this. And I think this whole other perspective that I think this film brings to the table, which is so important, is the ways that these upper class German people are benefiting from the genocide. Like their lives are actually improved because of it. You know, they have a higher standard of living. They're getting their literal belongings. I mean, they're taking their belongings and their things. They have this sense of privilege and superiority. You know, and I think that's such an important message to remember in the 21st century. That's like genocide. There's always going to be a component of dehumanization and hatred. But there's also always a component of gain. I mean, all of these people are doing labor for them. I mean, they're building things for them and doing the work that's actually building the infrastructure that's making this whole engine, you know, operate. And to have the film so like securely in the place of the people benefiting from the Holocaust, I think was a perspective that I hadn't ever considered before.
Yeah, wild. I mean, wild. You know, something as simple as you know, the wife played by Sandra Hüller, who, you know,
she's amazing. She's amazing.
She's amazing, and she's having a hell of a year. You know, and just trying on that fur coat in front of the mirror, and just you know, taking out these random objects that are inside, discarding it, and just I mean,
I didn't
it's
understand
simple.
it too when that scene happened, and that's actually what I loved about it. Is I didn't. Like, when that scene happened, I thought someone had bought her a fur coat. I actually didn't understand it at that moment. And I love the way the film does that is, you know, there's no title card at the front that says, here we are outside Auschwitz, and this is the director. There's no there's really not any exposition at all. It's just...
Right.
It's just like we get thrown right into it. And there were multiple moments where there were things I didn't quite understand the importance of, that then later in the film you see the true horror of them. And then, you know, that for me was the fur coat, where I was like, in the scene I didn't quite realize it. And then it was 15 minutes later, they have a conversation where they're talking specifically about going through the clothing. And I was like, oh my God, like that's what that scene was.
Yeah. And I think that's it, Ian, that it's the matter of factness. It's the frankness with which, you know, these conversations are taking place and their actions. And it's just the casual evil on display. And it really is an incredible look at you know what human beings are capable of doing, the compartmentalization,
Yeah.
you know, and this dichotomy of you can enact, be in charge of, and lead this mass genocide on a daily basis, and yet have so much love and emotion within you that you display to your family. You can be a good father,
Sure.
you can, that you have a pet, the display of emotion that to someone's dog in the streets, despite what you are still capable of doing on it. I find that it's such an imbalance, and yet it speaks to something that is so innately human, and that is the real horrific element of all of this to me. It's funny, when I was watching this in the cinema, I heard at one point, I think it was around that exact scene that you mentioned, where they're discussing plans for the how to for them to be burned alive on a continuous basis. And a woman behind me just muttered, "Monsters." And I thought to myself, no, human beings, us,
I know.
you, me.
Yeah.
And that is what this movie gets to more than anything. And really, 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 really tough stuff.
Yeah. 100%.
And speaking to what you were saying about dropping us right in it, how incredible was that production design, the location? I mean, it was... I truly believed I was transported to a place and time.
Yeah. To say that the movie is like all about the sound design does so little justice to every other department, which was like perfect. Right. Yeah. And I was also shocked, when I heard about, because the way they filmed, my understanding is, and I could be wrong about some of this, but my understanding is the way that they filmed a lot of those scenes was that they basically hid cameras, kind of. I mean, hid is a strong word. I'm sure the actors knew where they were, but they basically placed cameras in the sets that were rolling constantly. I guess I heard somewhere that I think they had over like 300 or 400 hours of footage or something. So they rolled these cameras constantly so that the kids didn't really have to perform. And then they kind of would just give them like prompts on like what to do. And also, interestingly, they would do the scenes simultaneously. So it's like, while the kids are playing the drum in the bedroom, Sandra Hüller and her mother are having that conversation in the other room. Like they would set up the house and just let the house run on like a simultaneous basis, where it's like, we want the servants.
My word! Like
the footage of the servants preparing the food and stuff is like happening at the same time as the conversation upstairs, and it's and that's why the sound design can be the way it is because they're recording like 100 different tracks simultaneously in every location in the house. And so then they can like be like, oh, well, the kids are talking, the mom and dad are talking in this room while the kids are talking in this room, and so they would like film it all simultaneously, which is like fascinating and interesting.
What a decision! And that's such a Jonathan Glazer move. Right?
Yeah. Totally. But
that is wild.
What caught me off guard though, because I heard about that and I thought to myself, this is fascinating and interesting. It speaks to techniques that have been used in documentary or reality television or things like that, which is interesting and fits the story well. What I didn't expect is the way that every shot still felt like perfectly framed. like when you understand that they were filming that scene from like 4 separate cameras that were all kind of like hidden somewhere in the room, it's almost impossible to believe, because then you look at these shots and they just feel so, some of the exteriors too, the way when they're outside the house, and there's just something about kind of the symmetry of it, and that just feels so perfect. I did not expect to be, when I heard about the way the film was made, I knew that it was the right approach to the film, but I kind of expected in my head, but what you might sacrifice for that is some level of, this kind of image quality or composition. And I was completely wrong.
You'd think it would be apparent. Yeah, you'd think you'd notice that.
Yeah, but I was completely wrong.
Remarkable.
I mean, like every single shot was like a photograph. I was just like, oh, this is gorgeous and fascinating to look at.
Yeah. And I guess that kind of makes sense now as to why the performance of the children, for instance, are not really performing. I'm watching them and I'm like, no, they're just kids.
Yeah.
Behaving like kids. I mean, it was one of those remarkable things where you don't see it often, but I'm like, how is this child doing this? Because that is just natural behavior. There's nothing playing to a camera here.
Totally.
Insane. And sorry, go ahead.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, and like, the other thing that I think shocked me about the film is the ways that, like, it's simultaneously very kind of free-flowing. You get the sense that the scenes sometimes are unscripted or kind of... But on the other hand, like, even though it has this unscripted feeling, the situations that they choose to portray are so well... I mean, I hesitate to use the word written because it makes it sound like it's fabricated, because surely these are based off of real experiences. Mm-hmm. But, like, so many individual moments, like when he's fishing in the river... And the ash comes down the river, and then afterwards he's like blowing it out of his nose. He's like cleaning his face. Or like when they're gardening and the ash is getting used in the garden, or like his son playing with the gold fillings from teeth. I mean, so many of these
tiny,
moments,
small detail. Yeah,
so many of these moments are just like a dagger through the heart, and in some ways it's like. It's such an effective way, I think, to tell this story, to see these horrific byproducts rather than seeing the actual events. You just see these horrific byproducts and the ways that these people are interacting with them, and the ways that it's like in their bodies and around them and in their homes. And it's like, I think I definitely was guilty of thinking to myself, well, the Holocaust was happening, but, how much was this affecting a person living, quote unquote, on the outside of it? Mm-hmm. And I think, like, this film does such a good job of being like, the walls were not where the Holocaust, began. Mm-hmm. It's like this was a thing that is seeping into the world and affecting every single person who's around it, in every element of their lives. Yeah.
Yeah, and I have to agree with you as well. It's so impressive the restraint in the filmmaking. Yeah. There's so much restraint. There's so much of it that is so subtle, but the results of that are so damn effective. And I would venture so far as to say this may be the most harrowing depiction of the Holocaust that I've ever seen, despite the fact that you don't actually get to see very much.
Right.
And I think it's exactly because of that it really leaves such a lasting impact and impression. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. I want to talk about there were two scenes that I guess kind of tones that I didn't expect for the film at all. Mm-hmm. The first was the first time when you see the girl at night who's leaving apples, and that storyline, which I thought was a very interesting decision it's kind of the only time we leave the family, right? It is the only time we leave the family, is we go with this character, and it's shot in a vastly different way and stylized very differently. What did you think about that when that started, when the first time we saw that character?
I'm going to be honest, I didn't know what it was.
Yeah, same.
I really didn't know, what it was meant to represent, and it always seemed to happen around the time that the father of this family notices that his daughter is either sleepwalking or hiding.
I also thought it was potentially his own daughter.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
And actually, it wasn't until after the movie that Carrie Ann said to me that we were speaking about it, and she explained what was happening. Then I was like, "Oh, really? Wow!"
Yeah. There's this flat, in town. Yeah.
Yeah. So I didn't understand really what that was while watching the movie, because, like you just said, it's so separate and filmed in such an incredibly visually audacious, infrared night vision kind of way that I didn't really know what to expect. And then you hear the sound, like the music at that point, how it just and the
soundtrack is really interesting.
I didn't catch it. The first
which
time.
I think is totally fair. It's It's the type of thing that, again, I didn't expect in a movie that kind of feels so documentarian to then have this very kind of stylized sequence. But I think it's a lovely inclusion. I think, well, it's a charitable inclusion. I'll say that. So much of the film is saying, hey, every person who was aware of this found a way to compartmentalize it and deal with it. And it's very charitable of Jonathan Glazer to say, there were some people who tried to do something. Even if it kind of made no difference, there were some people who tried to do something, to help. And the lovely, I didn't quite understand it at first, but I think what's going on, so she finds, I think, a poem or a song written.
Yeah.
And then she plays it. And at first I didn't understand what was going on with the subtitles, but I think what he's implying is that she's like reading the lyrics while playing the notes or something.
Okay.
I think, but either way, regardless, it was beautiful. And I think it was this like, it was just a lovely moment. It was something that it didn't have to be included, but I think it was something to again speak to the, we needed to hear at some point, I think, in the film, at least one voice from inside the walls.
Yes.
And the fact that that's the way it was done, like this voice that couldn't be heard from the person, because we'll never hear it from that person, but was rescued by someone who was brave and took a risk to rescue just a shred of that thing, and then to go home and play it on the piano and experience it is, I think, a really lovely way to kind of talk about what that is like, because we won't see their faces and we won't hear their voices, but there are some shreds that have come to us, thanks to brave people who have found them and are telling that story.
So pleased that you mentioned that moment. Yeah, it's probably the one truly most beautiful moment in the entire film.
Yeah.
Of just sheer humanity. And so poetic, and I do wonder if that is because, thinking about it, how do you tell that moment in that specific way? I wonder if that is also some sort of detail, drawn from a real life. It's got to be, right? Because how do you present that?
Well, because it's the whole film is based off of a book, actually, which I actually didn't know until I saw the credits. And so I'm very curious to read the book and kind of discover, it didn't feel like a book adaptation when I was watching it. So I'm very curious to kind of read the book at some point and see kind of the perception of, I guess the point of view of the book and stuff, and how much of these kind of moments are pulled from that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I've heard it's a very loose adaptation, but still that actually makes me even more intrigued. And I didn't realize that this family were real characters, the Hoss family. I didn't realize that. Real people. He was actually a commandant of Auschwitz. That's
wild. The last thing, I know we're running a little short on time, but the last thing I want to ask about is this, and I guess it's a little bit, it's weird to say spoilers for a film like this, but it is the final moment of the film.
Mm-hmm.
When we see the documentary footage from present day. I'm curious about what you think what that moment meant to you, or how that moment felt to you.
Well, it was shocking. It comes out of nowhere. Comes out of nowhere, and then we go back.
When we went to it, I thought to myself, "Oh, will then be how the movie ends," which felt fitting. Yes, but then it was a double. It was I didn't expect to go here, and then I didn't expect to go back.
Sure. Yeah, it was. Well, it was. I mean, I don't. Have you ever been to Auschwitz?
No, I haven't.
No, me neither. I mean, I imagine it would be fascinating. I don't really want to, and yet I do kind of feel like it would just be really important in also a really strange way. But for me, it just felt like. The point of it felt like this is the legacy that he is leaving behind, or that he is still to leave. He's been given this new project under his name, right? They've even named it, I believe, after him. Mm-hmm. And after that incredible dry heaving moment at the very end, it felt like this is why. This is his legacy in a way that he either kind of can tell, he can sort of foresee that, or he just has no idea, but his body is almost that physical toll. It's so apparent. That's what it felt like to me. Anyway,
No, I
what
agree.
about you?
No, I agree. I think it was a really interesting choice, because I think my favorite again, it's so weird to use words like favorite parts of film for a film like this, but I think one of the most powerful parts of the film for me was the fact that, there wasn't this moment of big guilt from any of the characters. And so I think at first when I saw that he was potentially seeing this stuff, I almost got frustrated. I was like, no, I don't think you know about this. But then when I let it kind of sink in as the credits were playing, a part of me, and who knows, I think that moment's really up to interpretation as far as what he is thinking.
Right.
But a part of me kind of loves almost like some part of him, this thing inside of him is trying to be like, don't you see this? Mm-hmm. And then the conscious part of him chooses to be like, no, and just continue on his way. It's
yes.
like, which
yes.
I think is like such that, and to exactly what you said before, that is kind of, I think, the core message of the film is like, the way that we get here is not by like choosing to be bad people. It's just by consistently, in many small ways and moments in our lives, ignoring this thing inside of us that says, don't you think you should stop and examine this a little bit more? And when you kind of get so used to pushing through that and saying, no, I don't have to listen to that, I don't have to worry about that, you get to this place. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating because it's like we all have a conscience.
Yeah.
There are things that weigh on us in ways that you might not even fully acknowledge, but your body will tell you that in a very physical way. When you're stressed in life or you're worried about and things pile up and you don't deal with that, you will suffer an anxiety attack. And ask anybody who has an anxiety attack. That is something awful, but extremely physical to go through.
Yeah.
And you think it's nothing to do with stress or anything. You think it's no, I've got something physically wrong. I'm having a heart attack, or I've got some sort of, So that that final moment with him is such an incredible visual representation of the culmination of one's own actions. Whether you choose to fully deal with that or not, it shows in small ways, in large ways. There's a physical toll. Yeah,
it feels funny to bring it up because it's a very different piece of media, but there's this kind of amazing. I think it's an HBO docuseries called The Jinx, and it's about.
Oh, incredible!
Have you seen The Jinx?
One of the best documentaries.
I'm so glad you've seen it. I feel like everybody I talk to hasn't seen The Jinx, but I love The Jinx. And if you recall, there's that moment at the end when they kind of finally catch him, where they find that letter that, it puts the things together where it's like, oh no, you did kill these people. And they start talking to him, and he's on camera, and he starts like dry heaving. Do you remember this? He does this weird thing. It's like he's like burp. There's like something in him that's like burping out of him, and he's like, and then he's like, he ends the interview. He kind of like finds a way to like talk it off, but there's this terrifying like 60 seconds where he's like, no, that's not my handwriting, and then he just goes like, and he's like, oh no, I didn't write that, like.
That's so funny. I cannot remember that moment. Wow.
I thought about that. I think about it a lot because I do think there is exactly what you said. I do think evil deeds, or any stress or anything, cruelty, it leaves a mark on our bodies. And I think even if our brains find a way to compartmentalize it, I think it's there. And so I was kind of, I think, happy for the boldness of that moment, of kind of this moment of seeing like, oh, you may think that everything is fine, but there is this thing there's this thing inside of you like a cancer, and you cannot get rid of it as much as you would try to pretend like you're a good person. Like there's this thing inside of you that says otherwise a little bit.
Absolutely, yeah. Oh God, it's so. I think to when you're saying, the fun moment. Oh, it's hard to say the fun. When we went to the cinema, we got a box of popcorn.
Yeah.
Dude, after a while, you put that box of popcorn on the floor because it's so hard to just be like,
Yeah,
have a sip of your Coke.
Yeah, it's like disrespectful to like
Yes.
to be enjoying this movie. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I think that's important. I heard this little segment by and now I'm forgetting the name. The director who directed Funny Games, Michael Haneke. But he was very critical of Schindler's List, actually, which a lot of people love, and I'm not necessarily going to say it's a bad movie, but his kind of thing was basically like, when you're telling a story about the Holocaust, something this terrible, it's kind of your responsibility as a director to not fill it with like drama and suspense, like because ultimately drama and suspense is kind of entertainment to some degree. Like his argument was like, when you're talking about something with this level of gravity and realism, he's like, you kind of just need to show exactly what it is and then let people experience it, as opposed to creating some sense of, will they survive?
Like
will they not?
Uh-huh.
Is kind of creating this narrative of the classic kind of Hollywood narrative of an act structure and building and hopes and expectations. His kind of argument was like, a story about this can't have that, because having that makes it inherently entertaining, and a story about this should never be entertaining. It's
such an interesting step. I mean, he would love this film then. He would love this film.
I mean, I think that's why I saw that little interview segment on Instagram, and I don't know the context of it, but I would imagine the context of it was speaking about this film.
And yet the paradox of it all is that this movie is so vastly entertaining.
Sure. Oh yeah, you can't look away. You can't look away.
Ultimately, yeah. It's so gripping, and that is a word that I would use to describe this movie. It was gripping. I was on the edge of my seat the entire time.
Yeah, I agree.
Oh boy. What would you pair this movie with?
Well,
just to make for a super depressing one of films for people.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a very famous film, so this is not, this may be kind of the obvious pairing, but there's a film called Night and Fog. That's a documentary film from 1956.
Oh, I don't know it.
It's a short film. I watched it a couple times in school, actually, and it's an extremely powerful film. That essentially a camera person goes into Auschwitz and just shows the images. This is where this many people were killed every day. This is where they slept. They basically, with almost zero commentary on how you should feel about it, they just walk you through what the concentration camp was. And
oh
it's
my God,
brutal.
I really want to see this.
You should. It's a short film. I don't think it's longer than, it's 32 minutes. Yeah. And it was made in 56, so like very recently after the events occurred. And it's kind of, at the time when I watched it, it's kind of hailed as kind of, it's an important film, I think, in the conversation about the Holocaust. I've heard it talked about a lot. And I do think it is one of those films that people are kind of like, we should always be watching this all the time, to just kind of remember this. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So what's it called?
Night and Fog. Yeah. It's a French film.
Okay. Cool. Thanks, Ian. Yeah. Well, I decided to go with a movie called A Hidden Life. I don't know if you saw it. It's a Terrence Malick movie that came out, I think 2019. And yeah, it's a film. I believe it's a true story about this guy, this Austrian farmer who he basically refused to go to war and fight for the Nazis. And I find that just as like a direct parallel to the choices that this family make in this movie. Me and Terrence Malick, we don't get on with each other.
But this one works for you.
But this kind of works for me. It has a beautiful James Newton Howard score, who's one of my favorite composers. But the score in this movie is absolutely gorgeous. Yeah, so I think it would be a very interesting watch alongside this film. And I'll also throw in, I don't know if you ever heard of the play Good. But yeah, I saw it a couple of years ago at the Harold Pinter Theatre. But it's essentially about this professor who gets seduced into joining the Nazis, and he has like a Jewish best friend, but he ends up basically going all in on what they call the final solution, and sort of how he justifies his actions. And I saw it with David Tennant in the lead role at the Harold Pinter, and it's a fascinating and again really powerful story. I highly recommend it. All right, Ian. Well, thank you so much. I highly recommend this film. Traumatic though it may be, it's certainly very, very important. I just want to say a special thanks to Phoenix Cinema as always. Our music is by Stefan Krieger, and the show is edited by Noah Anderson. And if you want to go and watch a movie, head to the Phoenix Cinema. I'll meet you there.